Hello, and welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Tuesday, October 21st, 2025. Outage at Amazon Web Services disrupts websites across the internet. Attendees walk through the expo hall at a conference hosted by Amazon Web Services at the Nation in Las Vegas on November 28, 2023. AWS is responsible for infrastructure supporting websites across the internet. A massive outage at Amazon Web Services disrupted major websites and apps on Monday, in a show of how one company's online infrastructure has become essential for many modern businesses to function. Amazon said it was fixing the problem, but some disruptions were still ongoing as of Monday evening. Tech experts tell NPR the incident highlights just how vulnerable companies are to these kinds of outages. Here's what to know about what happened and why a single outage could be so damaging. The outage started early Monday. Amazon reported increased error rates and latencies starting around 3 a.m. Eastern Time that involved its facility in Northern Virginia. Users reported trouble with popular websites and apps, including Duolingo and the online games Roblox and Fortnite. Financial service companies like Coinbase, Robinhood, and Venmo also reported disruptions, as did the companies that operate the chatbots, Perplexity, and ChatGPT. Amazon said its main website was affected. United Airlines, Canva, Reddit, and Flickr also acknowledged problems with their websites. The Associated Press, NPR, and the New York Times Games also said they had issues. Amazon said late Monday that it was making progress to restoring full functionality. How Amazon's cloud computing powers much of the internet. Amazon's cloud computing service, AWS, is like an invisible scaffolding that helps much of the internet function. AWS lets companies store and manage data online using its database service, DynamoDB, which was the service affected by the outage. In other words, they rent out their cloud computing resources to others so they can serve their own customers, says Cheng Lu, an assistant professor at the University of Virginia who specializes in cloud computing. An early morning software update to DynamoDB, however, contained an error which took down the service in Northern Virginia. The error within that update then caused a chain reaction of service failures and disruptions. Amazon says it has invested more than $50 billion in data centers in the state, which is home to the largest cluster of data centers in the United States. Amazon's importance in cloud computing is a mixed bag for customers. According to Synergy Research Groups, AWS holds about 30% of the worldwide cloud computing market. Other big players are Microsoft and Google. Betsy Cooper, a cybersecurity expert and the director of the Aspen Institute Police Academy, says there are pros and cons to companies using Amazon or another big provider for cloud computing. They offer strong cybersecurity protections and convenience. We all have to have an incentive to use the big companies because they're so ubiquitous and it's easier for us to access all of our data in one place. But she says there's a downside. That's great until something goes wrong, and then you really see just how dependent you are on a handful of those companies. The Dodgers want to win another World Series. The Toronto Blue Jays are in their way. George Springer of the Toronto Blue Jays celebrates after hitting a 3-run home run against the Seattle Mariners during the 7th inning in a Game 7 of the American League Championship Series in Toronto. The Toronto Blue Jays, with a 4-3 win in Monday night's American League Championship Series. Game 7 over the Seattle Mariners are headed back to the World Series for the first time in more than 30 years. Their opponent, the $340 million buzzsaw known as the Los Angeles Dodgers. With the biggest payroll in baseball, the Dodgers are baseball's most successful franchise in recent years. With 2 World Series titles and 5 National League pennants over the past 9 seasons. Now, they are 4 wins away from becoming a sport's first repeat champions in a quarter century. The Blue Jays emerged in July as one of the best teams in baseball and ended the season 94-68 at the top of the AL East, a remarkable turnaround from 2024's last place finish in the division. The odds Toronto bats overwhelmed their division rival New York Yankees, pouring on 34 runs over 4 games. Still, Toronto needed all 7 games of the ALCS to return to the World Series. The Mariners took the Blue Jays to the brink with 14 home runs and some dominant pitching performances that helped them jump out to a 2-0 series lead. But the Mariners, the only MLB franchise to have never reached the World Series, cracked as the pressure mounted late in the series. With a 3-2 series lead, needing just 1 win for the first ever pennant, the Mariners committed 3 errors in the Game 6 loss. Then, after taking a 3-1 lead in Game 7, allowed a late 3-run home run by Toronto's George Springer to dash their hopes again. It was never a doubt that one of these guys was going to come through. It was just a matter of when, said Toronto pitcher Jeff Hoffman in a TV interview with Fox after the game. We kept it close enough for long enough, and they did. It is Toronto's first trip to the World Series since 1993, when the Blue Jays won back-to-back titles. By contrast, the 93-69 Dodgers stumbled at times during the regular season, including several late-game collapses by a shaky bullpen and a humbling September sweep by the last-place Pittsburgh Pirates. But in the postseason, Los Angeles has looked unstoppable. In the NLDS, the 96-66 Philadelphia Phillies managed only a single win over the Dodgers, and in the NLCS, Los Angeles swept the 97-65 Milwaukee Brewers. The Dodgers' crown jewel, the two-way superstar Shohei Ohtani, single-handedly powered Los Angeles to their Game 4 NLCS clinching victory with 3 home runs as a batter as starting pitcher. 6.1 shutout innings with 10 strikeouts, a performance so Herculean that it was instantly in the conversation for the greatest individual game of all time. In other words, the Dodgers are firing on every cylinder, and they will be an even bigger challenge for Toronto than Seattle. The Blue Jays excel at putting balls into play, which worked to their advantage in the ALCS. But Los Angeles is a better defensive team than the Mariners, and their starting pitchers are a level above too. But Los Angeles does have a weakness, their bullpen, which lost plenty of games for the Dodgers in the second half of the season. The Blue Jays could have an opportunity there if they can put more pressure on the Dodgers starters than the Brewers did. Just 2 earned runs over 4 games. Game 1 of the World Series is set for Friday, October 24th, in Toronto. 40 years ago, a woman made Harlem Globetrotters history. Lynette Woodard plays in 1986 for the Harlem Globetrotters during a game against the Washington Generals at the Forum Indoor Arena in Inglewood, California. In 1985, Woodard became the first woman ever to play with the Harlem Globetrotters basketball team. In 1926, the Harlem Globetrotters basketball team was founded, more than 20 years before black men were allowed on professional basketball teams. But this squad, composed of only African American players, gradually gained popularity in the basketball world. When their founder, Abe Saperstein, died 40 years later, the team struggled to maintain that popularity. Over the next 2 decades, the Harlem Globetrotters team was sold twice. And by 1984, the new owner was looking for ways to freshen up the performance. In 1985, the team put out a newspaper ad offering tryouts to women. One of the 60 women that responded to the ad, only 20 moved on to the second round of tryouts, and one of the players at the top of the list was University of Kansas basketball star Lynette Woodard. The Wichita Can native told NPR that she started playing basketball with her brother and was inspired by her cousin, Harlem Globetrotter Hubert Geese Ausby. I can remember when I was very young, Woodard said, him coming to our house and showing our family a lot of ball handling tricks. And I was just so amazed. It's been a dream to, possibly play for the Harlem Globetrotters one day. Standing at 6 feet tall with dark brown curly hair, Woodard had captained Team USA to win gold at the 1984 Olympic Games in Los Angeles and had set an NCAA career scoring mark at the University of Kansas that would stand until Iowa's Caitlin Clark broke it in 2024. Speaking to NPR in January 1985, Woodard described athletic abilities that would make her a key player to the Harlem Globetrotters. My game is softer, Woodard said. I don't have the explosiveness that a male athlete may have, but I think the qualities that I do have, make me stand out when I play. 10 months later, on October 7th, the Harlem Globetrotters announced a new player lineup. In a Harlem Globetrotters press video, Woodard said the finalists lined up after practice for the announcement. I was standing there. I was nervous, Woodard says in the video. And he said, and now the First Lady from the University of Kansas. And he called my name out, and it hit me. I'm the one. Lynette Woodard became the first woman to join the Harlem Globetrotters. She wore the bright red, white, and blue jersey for 2 years before moving on to playing professional basketball in Italy and Japan. Woodard eventually made her way back to the United States, working as the director of athletics for the Kansas school system. In 1997, the Women's National Basketball Association began its inaugural season, and Woodard returned to play 1 year each for the Cleveland Rockers and the Detroit Shock before officially retiring from playing. As a trailblazer in the sport, Woodard was inducted into the Kansas Sports Hall of Fame, the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame twice, and the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. 40 years since Woodard joined the Harlem Globetrotters, her legacy continues. 5 women play for the Globetrotters today. What we know about the devastating storm in western Alaska. The remnants of Typhoon Halong floated homes off their foundations and washed debris across the western Alaska village of Kiwalak on Thursday, October 16, 2025. Residents lost boats, four-wheelers, and snowmobiles, snow machines, some of which scattered miles away from the community. In the late night hours of October 11th, the remnant of Typhoon Halong slammed Alaska's southwest coast, bringing hurricane-force winds and record flooding to numerous Alaska Native villages on the coast. Evacuees and rescuers describe massive destruction. Utility poles snapped in half, boardwalks, the roads and sidewalks in many tundra villages. Uprooted houses floated off their foundations, some with families still inside. According to the state, more than 1,000 people are displaced. Some have no home to return to. One woman was found dead, and two of her family members remain missing. The state of Alaska's Emergency Operations Center is in its highest possible level of emergency response. Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy has called for a federal disaster declaration for the region. Evacuees from Kipnuk and Kiwalaga rest and eat dinner on October 15th at an emergency shelter at Alaska National Guard Readiness Center in Bethel. Where is most affected? The remnant of Typhoon Halong had sweeping impacts across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta and an area in western Alaska hundreds of miles from the U.S. road system and about the size of Oregon, with dozens of small villages scattered throughout. A barge collided with the Brown Slows Bridge in Bethel early in the morning of October 12, 2025. The coastal village of Kipnuk and Killiknock took the brunt of the storm and are being almost entirely evacuated, per the State Emergency Operations Center. In addition, regional health officials have listed more than a dozen villages where substantial damage has been reported, and the state says that nearly 50 have reported some impacts. Damages are still being assessed, and it's not clear yet how many people will be permanently displaced. Some rural communities that have reported significant impacts of the storm. Evacuation slowed and complicated by remoteness. Initially, many of the displaced shelters in schools throughout the region, but with heating, fuel, and water sewer systems strained, local officials said it wasn't safe for people to stay. Emergency responders started to evacuate people to Bethel, the 6,500-person hub community of the region, which saw comparatively little damage from the storm. But the emergency shelter there reached capacity quickly. Within 2 days, displaced residents were being flown to Anchorage, 400 air miles away. Evacuees had to board a C-17 military cargo plane on the first day of mass evacuations from Bethel to Anchorage on October 15, 2025. Residents of Kipnuk were evacuated in a C-17 military transport. The village was one of the worst hit by the remnants of the typhoon. Buggy Carl, tribal administrator in Kipnuk, said despite the damage, it's daunting for community members to leave the place they have such deep history. The villages of Kuskokwim Delta are the traditional homelands of generations of Yupik people. I know their mindset that their heart is here, he said on October 15th. They don't know anywhere else to go because they grew up here. They have their own food throughout the year long. throughout the year long, doing subsistence hunting. They just can't leave. That connection to land and food is a primary concern for many facing long term relocation. Some who've stayed behind in destroyed villages have done so with the goal of salvaging what subsistence foods they could: moose, musk, ox, beluga, salmon berries, salmon, seal oil, emperor goose. Others speak of the heart wrenching loss of ancestors' graves. In Quilingong, residents reported seeing unearthed coffins piled up at the end of the airport runway after the floodwaters receded. Volunteers Caitlin Andrew and Angie Walter handle food relief donations at the Bethel Search and Rescue Building. How was the typhoon remnant so destructive? Initially, climate models showed the remnant typhoon trekking north, but according to Rick Thoman, an Alaska climate specialist with the University of Alaska Fairbanks, the storm picked up speed and shifted suddenly, taking its path right toward the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coast. That was only a day and a half before the storm reached Alaska waters, a tight timeline for evacuation. High water levels in the wake of ex-Typhoon Halong caused flooding in Bethel. This region is also the forefront of climate change. Permafrost, or ground that is frozen year-round, underpins many of the villages and is thawing, leading to rapid erosion and instability. The Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium says nearly 150 communities in Alaska, many of the YK Delta, will need to relocate fully or partially in the coming years because of permafrost thaw, land subsidence, erosion, and some other combination of climate-driven factors. The hundreds of square miles of the Delta are very close to sea level. Many communities don't have much high ground. And while some homes and buildings are built on pilings driven deep in the ground, many others sit on posts or less stable foundations. These factors combine to make the land more vulnerable to storm-driven erosion and structures more vulnerable to flood damage. What's next? If communities choose to rebuild, it will be difficult. The region is also recovering from major flooding in August of last year. Kipnuk, one of the villages hardest hit by the remnants of Typhoon Halong, received one of the first ever federal disaster declarations for an Alaska tribe in the wake of that flooding.